Heyo, back at it again with another video. Thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. So it's been a little bit since I've been making videos. I took some time off for the 4th of July weekend and week. So hopefully, to my American viewers, hopefully you had a phenomenal 4th of July weekend full of fun, festivities, and celebrating freedom and whatnot. So, I'm back, and the first video of me being back is talking about Taiwan. So, Taiwan has been in the news a lot lately, especially the past couple months, but mostly in the past year or so. So, we're going to head over to Google Maps. Let's check out where Taiwan is on the map. We'll layer it. So, if you look at Taiwan, the main island right here, Formosa, what you see is the island is clearly divided more or less in half. You got mountains on one side, and you got a lot of urban cities on the west side, from Tainan. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, all the way up to Taipei. You got all of these cities all along the western shore of Taiwan. So, if you're China and you want to invade, this is really difficult, mainly because you're gonna have to fight urban warfare on the west side of the island, and then mountain warfare on the east side of the island. So we're gonna layer this again, but then there's the problem of getting there. Now, if you look at the Taiwan Strait, it's roughly, what is that, 115 miles, 117 miles? And, that's some serious distance between the mainland and the main island. So about 115, 120 miles, and that's about 200 kilometers. That's some serious distance to cover. That takes you a little bit of time. Now, the Chinese can either do a naval assault, and then the clearest assault would be somewhere along this section, and that would take some time to not only cross the strait, or you can do a paratroop type assault and then bring in heavy armor and other equipment by sea later. Soldiers coming in by a parachute might not be the best way to do it, because you have to bring a lot of forces to bear to conquer this island, and you need a lot of soldiers in a pretty short amount of time. So probably the best route for the Chinese, if they actually do want to invade, would probably be a naval assault. And that's, again, we're going to measure distance. That's over 100 miles, and doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're trying to move a military across, it's pretty long distance. If we look at the English Channel, the invasion of Normandy, you had, if we zoom in, there we go, we had from the southern shore of Britain all the way to the beaches of Normandy. That's about 100 miles. Obviously, the distance between China and Taiwan is a little longer, but if we look at the D-Day invasions, they had to cross a body of water about 100 miles long, and it was challenging to bring logistics to bear. Obviously, the Germans thought that the British, Americans, Canadians, and other allies would go to the Pas de Calais, which is only about 20 miles from the southern shore of the British Isles. Maybe go back to Dunkirk, because that would be the shortest. But that wasn't the route they took. The route was Normandy. So I want to dive deep into urban warfare and mountain warfare. So if we look at urban warfare, let's just look at the battles in Ukraine. Let's look at Bakhmut. Bakhmut was a meat grinder, and Bakhmut, a pre-war population of only 70,000. The population of Taiwan is 20 million, and the Russians, I've estimated, I think 100,000 losses just in a city of, pre-war population of 70,000. That we have different urban battles throughout the course of this war in Ukraine, but also other examples. You go back, you talk about maybe the Battle of Berlin, 1945, World War II, potentially other key battles, especially maybe like more recent, maybe Fallujah within the Iraq War, post 9/11. Talk about a whole bunch of different urban warfare, and urban warfare is challenging because you have so many angles to try and defend against. You don't know where the enemy is. You might not know exactly where the enemy is positioned. But if you look at Taiwan, you have all this urban core right down the western side of the island with a population of over 20 million that you would have to, go through to fully conquer the island. But then we have mountains on this side, and what we've seen in post 9/11, the war in Afghanistan, you can even go back to the Soviet-Afghan war. You look at the Soviet-Afghan war. The Soviets were there, invaded in the late 1970s. I didn't even realize they invaded on Christmas 1979. That's wild. Anyways, the Soviet Union, massive land army, had all these, nuclear weapons, all these tanks, aircraft, and whatnot. And the Mujahideen, they won. The Soviets were there for 10 years. And Afghanistan's, if you look just at a map, you would see that Afghanistan is very mountainous. You got Kabul over here. You got a whole bunch of others, major cities, mainly in a ring around if Google Maps will load correctly. Come on, there we go. We got Kandahar right here, Herat over here, Sharif, Mazar-i-Sharif over here, and then other areas. So Afghanistan is very mountainous, but then we can even look at the U.S. war in Afghanistan. Now, the U.S. war in Afghanistan initially was a success, and then they, after 9/11, Bush demanded that Taliban extradite Osama bin Laden, and then there was Operation Enduring Freedom, which only took place for, I think, the Northern Alliance and other anti-Taliban forces were able to overthrow the government of Afghanistan relatively quickly. But if you look at it, it was a 20-year engagement, and then slowly but surely the Taliban and others were able to push the coalition back, and ultimately the American public loses interest. I've said this before, I think, on the channel, but maybe not. To be honest, we as Americans, we don't lose wars, we just lose interest. Like, think about Vietnam, for example. We're going great, American public loses interest, there's a huge anti-war movement, and then you have the helicopters taking off from embassy in Saigon. Same thing with the war in Afghanistan. Look at this. The American public loses interest over the course of 20 years. And ultimately, now we have, Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan post, evacuation of Kabul. But my point being, mountain warfare, we could look to Afghanistan. Urban warfare, we could look to Bakhmut. And if you're trying to conquer Taiwan, you have to fight not only in the urban areas, but also in the mountain areas of Taiwan. To conquer Taiwan, you have to bring a lot of forces to bear, whether either they're over sea or air, and you have to do this in a relatively quick time span, and that's logistically complicated to do. But urban warfare and mountain warfare on the island of Taiwan, I just don't think the Chinese are capable of it. The last time the Chinese fought a war was with Vietnam in 1979, and it did not go well for them. And that was, and if we look at a map, China and Vietnam are, have a really long border. Relatively speaking, 300-mile border. But for China to invade Taiwan, you have to cross 100 miles of open ocean, and then you have to fight in urban areas, and then you have to fight in mountain areas. And I just don't see the Chinese being able to do that. So the Chinese aren't capable of invading Taiwan, in my opinion. With that being said, that's the end of the video. I know that was a little long, so thank you to all who stuck with me to the end. With that, that's the end of the video, and I will see you in the next one. Deuces.